we're going to look at when we use the cosine law and when we use the sine law. Now, the sine law is for triangles that have two side angle pairs. So I'm just going to pull up an example. Here's an example right here. Okay, now take a look here. What we mean by a side angle pair is if you take a look at angle B, 80 degrees, that's given, and side B is what you're trying to find. And angle C is given, and then the side across from C, little c, is given as well. So that's basically two side angle pairs. We have a side and an angle across from each other, including the unknown, and then we have a side and an angle across from each other. And remember that in this case, we would have, if we were writing it, it would be sine B over B is equal to sine C over C. And then we could just solve for the missing angle. Okay, so that's one example. Let's take a look at another example with some slightly different numbers. Okay, so in this triangle, if you take a look here, again, we have two side angle pairs. The unknown here happens to be an angle, but we have this side angle pair, 10, and the angle, B, and then we have the opposite side angle pair, angle A is given and side A is given. So again, we would say the sine of B over 10 is equal to the sine of 50 over 12. So we would use the sine law to solve for the missing angle, which is B. Okay, so the summary for the sine law is what you would do, and you can write this down if you would like. You use the sine law when you have two side angle pairs. Okay, so two side angles that are across from each other, and you can just put that into the law. Okay, now the cosine law is a little different. Here's an example right here. In triangles where you don't have two side angle pairs, for example, we have one side angle pair here. We have angle C, which is 42, and then side C. Side C is the unknown. But we don't have another side angle pair because neither B or A angles are given. We do have the opposite sides, however. We have side A and we have side B. But to use the sine law, we have to have two side angle pairs. So we actually only have one in this case. And when you only have one, that's when you use the cosine law. So let's take a look at one more example. So here's another example. I'm just going to slide it into the frame. There we go. This is an obtuse angle triangle. Or, well, it looks like an obtuse angle, but the angle here is actually 70 degrees. Okay, so in this case, we have a side angle pair here. So we have angle B is given at 70 degrees, and side B, okay, is the unknown. So that's one side angle pair. But we don't have either angle A or C. We do have the two sides, though. So again, when you only have one side angle pair, you have to use the cosine law. Okay, so the summary when we use the cosine law is basically you use the cosine law when you have only one side angle pair. Now, there's some examples of triangles that are a little tricky. It's difficult to figure out whether or not you use the sine law or the cosine law. So let's take a look at some of those examples. Here's an example right here. Okay, in this case, this is a little tricky to figure out. Here's one side angle pair. We have angle R, and then the side across from it is 12. And then we have, actually this one's not that hard to figure out because we do have two side angle pairs, so we could just use the sine law. Okay. It's just a little more complicated because that's an obtuse angle triangle. So let's take a look at this one here. Okay, this one's a little more complicated. If you remember what these two lines mean, this is an isosceles triangle. Isosceles means that the two sides are equal. That's what these two small lines mean. When we have these two sides equal, it means that the angles at the bottom here, like angle A and angle C, are also equal. We have one side angle pair given, but we don't have any other sides or any other angles. That's why this one is tricky to figure out. The interesting thing here, though, is that we have, if you take a look at this angle here, 30 degrees, we know that all the angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if we take 180 and we subtract 30 degrees, like so, what we get is we get 150. Okay, so half of 150 equals 75. So that means each one of these angles is 75 degrees. It's a little hard to write with the mouse. Okay, so I put 75 degrees at the bottom here for each one of these angles, A and C. So now what we have is we have two side angle pairs. So we can use the sine law because we have this side angle pair, and then we can use either one of these. We can either use angle C and little c, or we can use angle A and little a. Okay, so that's just one example. Let's see if we can take a look at another example. Here's a great example right here. I'm just going to slide it into the frame so you can see. Okay, we have, in this example, we have one side angle pair. Now this is tricky because usually when you think that we have one side angle pair, we have to use the cosine law. But the problem is that we don't have, we need the two sides. Okay, so we need this side over here in order to use the cosine law. This is really a sine law question because the angle here is the one that we need to use to make the second side angle pair. And you can tell that, remember, all the angles in a triangle have to add up to 180 degrees. So if you look at that, so let's see. So basically, okay, we have 80 there, so basically we just have to find these two here have to add up to 100, this angle and this angle, to make all the angles equal to 180. So basically we just have to take 100 and subtract 34. And again, that's a little hard to write with the mouse. Okay, so 100 minus 34 is 66. So 66 degrees goes in here. Now when you have 66 degrees, we have two side angle pairs, and we can use the sine law. Now I have one other example that is fairly challenging. So we're just going to move this one out of the way. Let's take a look at this one. It's coming into the frame now. Okay. Wow, this one's really complicated. Okay, we don't actually have any side angle pairs, but we do have a bunch of angles outside here. Now, to take a look here, here's a straight line at the bottom, and the angle on the outside is 20 degrees. And we know that any straight line, the angles have to add up to 180. So if you take 180 and subtract 20, you get 160. So this is 160 degrees right here. Okay. So now that gives us one side angle pair here. But again, we have a problem because we need two side angle pairs to be able to use the sine law. Now, that's going to be tricky. So what we have to do is we have to figure out, well, okay, so now that we know that this angle is 160 degrees, we have one side angle pair, which means that we could probably do the cosine law. And we can, because we have one side angle pair here, and then we have the other two sides, 100 here and 80 here. Okay? And that's pretty much it for that topic. So you can try identifying some triangles on your own, whether or not to use the sine law or the cosine law to solve for missing angles and missing sides.